The crystal chandeliers sparkled like diamonds above the Grand Wellington Hotel's ballroom. Every table was covered with white silk cloths, and fresh roses sat in expensive vases. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking glasses and soft laughter. This wasn't just any dinner party. Tonight was the annual charity gala for St. Mary's Children's Hospital, and tickets cost more than most people made in a month. Isabella Martinez moved quietly between the tables, carrying a silver tray loaded with champagne glasses. Her black uniform was pressed perfectly, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She had been working at the Grand Wellington for almost 4 months now, ever since she lost her job at the music store downtown. The pay wasn't great, but the tips from these fancy events helped her scrape together enough money each month. She needed every penny she could get. Her younger brother Carlos was lying in a hospital bed across town, fighting a rare blood condition that required expensive treatments. The medical bills kept piling up, even with insurance. Their parents had already sold their car and taken out loans against their small house. Isabella worked double shifts whenever she could, sometimes 16 hours a day, just to help keep their family afloat. Tonight felt different from the other events she had worked. Usually there was soft piano music playing in the background, while the guests ate and talked. The hotel always hired professional musicians for these high-end gatherings. But as Isabella walked around the room, she noticed something was missing. The beautiful black grand piano in the corner sat silent and empty. She had noticed that piano on her very first day working here. It was a Steinway, the same brand her grandmother used to play when Isabella was little. Every time she walked past it, she felt a small tug in her chest. It reminded her of afternoons spent sitting next to her grandmother on the piano bench, learning simple songs and scales. Those days felt like a lifetime ago now. Isabella's family used to have an old upright piano in their living room. It wasn't fancy, but it worked perfectly fine. She had spent hours every day after school practicing on it. Her music teacher said she had real talent and should think about studying music in college. But when the medical bills started coming, the piano was one of the first things they had to sell. As Isabella served appetizers to a table of well-dressed couples, she overheard them talking about the missing music. "It's quite odd without the piano player, don't you think?" said a woman wearing more jewelry than Isabella had ever seen in one place. Her husband nodded and looked around the room. "Yes, it makes the whole evening feel a bit flat." At another table, a group of business owners were having a similar conversation. "We're paying $5,000 per table for this fundraiser," one man said quietly. "You'd think they could at least provide proper entertainment." "His dinner," companion shrugged. "Maybe the musician got sick or something." Isabella tried not to listen, but she couldn't help overhearing these comments as she worked. She felt bad for Ms. Patricia, the event coordinator, who was clearly stressed about the situation. Patricia had always been kind to Isabella, never treating her like she was invisible the way some of the guests did. The hotel's event staff were all talking about it too. During a quick break in the kitchen, Isabella heard 2 of her co-workers discussing the problem. "Patricia's been on the phone for the last hour trying to find a replacement pianist," said James, one of the other waiters. "Apparently the guy they hired came down with food poisoning this afternoon." "That's terrible timing," replied Kelly, who worked the front desk. "These people expect everything to be perfect. If the evening doesn't go well, it could hurt the hotel's reputation." Isabella poured herself a glass of water and thought about the situation. She knew how important this fundraiser was for the Children's Hospital. Carlos had been a patient there for almost a year now, and she had seen firsthand how much good work they did. The doctors and nurses cared about every child who came through their doors. They never made families feel bad about not being able to pay right away. When she went back out to the ballroom, Isabella could see that Ms. Patricia was getting more worried by the minute. The coordinator kept checking her phone and looking toward the empty piano. Some of the guests were starting to seem restless. A few couples had already finished eating and were looking at their watches. Isabella knew that these charity events followed a specific schedule. First came the cocktail hour, then dinner, then usually some entertainment while people relaxed and hopefully opened their wallets to make donations. Without music, The whole evening felt rushed and awkward. As she cleared plates from the main course, Isabella found herself walking closer to the piano. She set down her tray for a moment and looked at the beautiful instrument. The keys were perfectly clean and white. Someone had polished the black surface until it shone like a mirror. She could see her own reflection looking back at her. For just a second, Isabella let herself imagine what it would be like to sit down and play. Her fingers could almost remember the feeling of moving across the keys, pressing down to create those beautiful sounds she used to love so much. She thought about her grandmother's gentle voice saying, "Music comes from the heart, mija. Don't think too hard about it. Just let it flow." But then reality crashed back in. She was just the waitress. These people had paid thousands of dollars to attend this event. They expected professional entertainment, not some girl who hadn't touched a piano in 2 years. Besides, she had work to do. There were still dessert courses to serve and coffee to pour. Isabella picked up her tray and continued working, but she couldn't stop thinking about that silent piano. Every time she walked past it, she felt like it was calling to her. She tried to push the feeling away and focus on her job, but it kept coming back stronger each time. The woman at table 12 was complaining loudly now. "This is quite disappointing," she said to her husband. "The Riverside Hotel's charity gala last month had a wonderful string quartet. This feels so plain in comparison." At table 8, a group of hospital board members were having a worried conversation about how the evening was going. Isabella heard one of them say, "We need this fundraiser to be successful. The children's wing expansion depends on raising at least $200,000 tonight." Isabella's heart sank when she heard that number. She knew how desperately the hospital needed that money. Carlos wasn't the only kid who needed help. Every time she visited him, she saw dozens of other families dealing with the same struggles her family faced. Kids who needed surgery, treatments, or just a safe place to get better. As the evening went on, Isabella noticed that fewer people seemed to be paying attention to the speeches about the hospital. The energy in the room was flat, and some guests were already starting to leave early. This was exactly what Miss Patricia had been worried about. During another quick break, Isabella found herself standing near the piano again. This time, she was close enough to touch it. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then very gently pressed one key. The note rang out clear and beautiful, even though she had barely touched it. That single note seemed to wake something up inside her chest. All the music she used to know and love came rushing back at once. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice again, encouraging her to be brave and trust herself. Isabella pulled her hand back quickly and looked around the ballroom. Ms. Patricia was standing near the entrance, still looking stressed and checking her phone constantly. The guests were finishing their dessert courses, but the conversations were getting louder and more restless. Without background music, every sound seemed amplified. She thought about Carlos lying in his hospital bed, probably watching cartoons, on the small TV mounted on the wall. He always asked her about work when she visited, and she could tell he felt guilty about the medical bills. He was only 16, but he worried about money like an adult. Isabella also thought about all the other kids at the hospital who needed help. The little girl with leukemia who was always smiling despite her treatments. The boy who had been in a car accident and was learning to walk again. The babies in the intensive care unit whose families camped out in uncomfortable chairs, hoping and praying for good news. This fundraiser wasn't just about having a fancy dinner party. It was about giving those kids a chance at healthy, happy lives. And right now it wasn't going well because there was no music to keep people engaged and in a giving mood. Isabella looked at the piano one more time. Her heart was beating faster than usual, and her palms felt sweaty. She had an idea that was either completely crazy or possibly brilliant. She wasn't sure which one it was, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. The evening was reaching a critical point. Soon the hospital's director would give his speech asking for donations, but if people were bored and ready to leave, they might not stick around to hear his important message. The success of the entire fundraiser was hanging in the balance, and that beautiful piano continued to sit silent in the corner. Isabella took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to talk to Ms. Patricia during the next break. She had no idea if her plan would work, but she had to try. Too much was at stake to just stand by and do nothing. The thought of what she was considering made her nervous, and Isabella's hands were shaking as she carried another tray of coffee cups to the guests. Her mind kept racing back to the crazy idea that had been growing stronger all evening. Every time she looked at that silent piano, she felt her grandmother's voice whispering in her ear. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards, Mija. But this wasn't just about taking a risk with her own life. If she messed this up, she could lose her job. And losing this job would mean no money for Carlos's treatments, no way to help her parents with the mounting bills. The weight of her family's financial situation pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Ms. Patricia was standing near the kitchen entrance, frantically scrolling through her phone contacts. Isabella had never seen the usually calm and professional woman look so worried. Patricia's forehead was creased with stress lines, and she kept glancing toward the ballroom, where the guests were finishing their desserts with growing restlessness. "Any luck with finding a musician?" asked Robert, the hotel manager, as he approached Patricia with his own concerned expression. Patricia shook her head and let out a frustrated sigh. "I've called everyone I know. The Johnson Piano Academy, the University Music Department, even some jazz bars downtown. Everyone's either already booked or can't get here in time." She looked at her watch nervously. "Dr. Williams is supposed to give his donation speech in 30 minutes. If we don't have some kind of entertainment to keep people engaged—" "I know," Robert said grimly. "Some of the guests are already asking for their coats." Isabella felt her heart sink even further. Dr. Williams was the director of the Children's Hospital, and his speech was the most important part of the evening. He would talk about all the kids who needed help, show pictures of the new wing they wanted to build, and ask people to open their hearts and wallets. But if half the audience had already left by then, the fundraiser would be a disaster. She thought about Carlos again, lying in his hospital bed 3 floors up from where Dr. Williams worked every day. Carlos always talked about how kind Dr. Williams was when he made his rounds. The doctor never seemed rushed, even though Isabella knew he had dozens of patients to see. He would sit on the edge of Carlos's bed and ask about school, about his dreams for when he got better. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Dr. Williams had asked Carlos just last week. "Maybe a teacher," Carlos had said shyly. "Or someone who helps kids like Isabella helps our family." The memory made Isabella's chest tight with emotion. Carlos was always thinking about helping others, even when he was the one who needed help most. And here she was, maybe having a chance to help raise money that could save lives, but she was too scared to try. Isabella watched as Patricia made another phone call, her voice getting more desperate with each conversation. "Hello, this is Patricia Chen from the Grand Wellington Hotel. We have an emergency situation. No, I understand you're closed today. Yes, I know it's short notice." The conversation ended with Patricia looking even more defeated than before. Isabella could see tears forming in the corner of the event coordinator's eyes, though Patricia was trying hard not to let them fall. That's when Isabella made her decision. She couldn't stand watching this woman struggle anymore, especially when she might be able to help. The worst thing that could happen would be that Patricia said no. But if she said yes, if Isabella could actually pull this off, it might save the entire evening. Isabella walked over to where Patricia was standing, her heart pounding so hard she wondered if other people could hear it. "Ms. Patricia?" she said quietly, not wanting to interrupt if Patricia was about to make another call. Patricia looked up with tired eyes. "Yes, Isabella? Do you need something?" "Actually," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was wondering if you still need someone to play piano tonight." Patricia stared at her for a moment, looking confused. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Isabella took a deep breath and tried to speak louder, though her voice still came out, shaky. "I said, if you need someone to play piano, I might be able to help." Robert, the manager, had been listening to their conversation, and he let out a small laugh that didn't sound very amused. "Isabella, we appreciate the offer, but we need a professional musician. These guests have paid a lot of money to be here tonight." Isabella felt her face getting hot with embarrassment, but Patricia held up a hand to stop Robert from saying anything else. The event coordinator looked at Isabella with curious eyes. "Do you actually know how to play piano?" "Yes," Isabella said, though her voice cracked a little on the word. "I mean, I used to play a lot when I was younger. I took lessons for about 10 years, and I practiced almost every day until—" She paused, not wanting to get into the whole story about her family's financial problems. "Until a couple years ago." Patricia's expression changed from curious to interested. "What kind of music do you know?" Isabella's mind raced through all the pieces she used to play. "Classical music, mostly. Chopin, Debussy, some Bach. But I also know some contemporary songs, and I can play by ear pretty well." She paused, then added honestly, "But I haven't played in public for a very long time, and I haven't practiced regularly in almost 2 years." Robert shook his head again. "Patricia, this is crazy. We can't put a waitress on stage in front of these people. What if she makes mistakes? What if she freezes up? This could be a disaster." But Patricia was looking at Isabella with a different expression now. There was something like hope in her eyes. "Isabella, are you sure you can do this? I mean, really sure? Because if we try this and it goes badly—" "I know," Isabella said quickly. "I know it's risky, and I know I'm just the waitress. But I've been listening to people complain about the missing music all night, and I can see how worried you are. The hospital really needs this fundraiser to work." She took another deep breath. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll try my hardest." Patricia looked toward the ballroom where the guests were getting more restless by the minute. Some people were already standing up from their tables, clearly getting ready to leave early. The woman at table 12 was loudly telling her friends about how disappointed she was with the evening so far. "How would this work?" Patricia asked. "You're supposed to be working." Isabella had already thought about that. "James and Kelly said they could cover my tables for a little while. They know how important tonight is." She paused, then added, "And I could change out of my uniform. I brought a simple black dress to change into after work. It's not fancy, but it's appropriate." Robert was still shaking his head. "This is insane. We don't even know if she's any good. What if she gets up there and can barely play chopsticks?" Isabella understood his concerns, she really did. But she also knew that doing nothing was definitely not going to work. "Maybe I could play just one song first," she suggested. "Just to show you that I can actually do it. If it's terrible, I'll stop right away and go back to serving tables." Patricia looked at her watch again. 25 minutes until Dr. Williams was supposed to speak. The donation part of the evening was approaching fast, and if people kept leaving at this rate, there might not be anyone left to hear the speech or make contributions. "What would you play?" Patricia asked. Isabella thought for a moment. She wanted something that would be beautiful but not too complicated, something that would set a good mood for the fundraiser. "Maybe Clair de Lune by Debussy. It's peaceful and elegant, and most people recognize it even if they don't know classical music very well." Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, clearly thinking hard about whether this was a good idea or the worst decision she could make. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Isabella. "You really think you can do this?" "I think I have to try," Isabella answered honestly. "These people came here to support the children's hospital. My brother is a patient there, and I know how much good the hospital does. If there's any chance I can help make tonight successful—" That seemed to be the deciding factor for Patricia. She nodded slowly. "Okay, let's try it. But just one song first, like you said. If it goes well, maybe you can play a few more pieces." During the donation speech, Robert threw up his hands in frustration. "I can't believe we're doing this. If this backfires, it's going to be a nightmare." But Patricia was already moving into action mode. "Isabella, go change into your dress. Meet me back here in 10 minutes. We'll have you play one song, and we'll see how it goes." Isabella nodded, her excitement and terror mixing together in her stomach. "Thank you, Miss Patricia. I promise I won't let you down." As she hurried toward the staff changing room, Isabella's mind was spinning with everything that could go right or wrong in the next few minutes. She was about to step out of her role as the invisible waitress and onto a stage in front of some of the wealthiest most demanding people in the city. Her hands were still shaking as she changed clothes, but there was something else mixed in, with the fear now. For the first time in a very long time, Isabella felt truly alive with possibility. Isabella's reflection stared back at her from the small mirror in the staff changing room. She had traded her black uniform for a simple navy blue dress that she had bought at a discount store 6 months ago. It wasn't designer like the gowns the female guests were wearing, but it was clean and appropriate. Her hands trembled as she tried to fix her hair, taking it down from the tight bun and letting it fall naturally around her shoulders. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, repeating the words her grandmother used to say before every recital or competition. "The music is inside you, it never left." But even as she said the words, doubt crept into her mind. What if her fingers didn't remember the pieces she used to know so well? What if 2 years of not practicing had made her rusty and slow? What if she got up there and embarrassed herself in front of all those important people? Isabella closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She thought about Carlos in his hospital bed, probably watching late-night cartoons and wondering why she hadn't come to visit him today. She thought about all the other children at St. Mary's who needed the money this fundraiser was supposed to raise. She thought about Dr. Williams and how disappointed he would be if hardly anyone stayed to hear his speech. When she opened her eyes again, Isabella saw something different in the mirror. Instead of the scared waitress who had been serving drinks all evening, she saw a young woman who was about to take the biggest chance of her life. For her family, for the hospital, and maybe for herself too. Isabella walked back toward the ballroom, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The hallway seemed longer than usual, and with each step her heart beat faster. She could hear the sounds of conversation and clinking glasses coming from the event, but there was still no music to tie everything together. Miss Patricia was waiting for her near the ballroom entrance, looking almost as nervous as Isabella felt. "Are you ready?" Patricia asked, though her voice suggested she wasn't entirely sure this was a good idea. "As ready as I'll ever be," Isabella replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Patricia nodded and led her toward the piano. As they walked across the ballroom, Isabella noticed that several guests looked up curiously. She could almost read their thoughts. Who was this young woman in the simple dress? Where was the professional musician they had been expecting? The piano looked even more intimidating up close than it had from across the room. The black surface was so polished that Isabella could see the chandelier lights reflected in it like stars. The keys seemed to be waiting for her, perfectly aligned and pristine white. Patricia stepped up to the small microphone that was set up near the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, "I apologize for the delay in our evening's entertainment. Our scheduled pianist was unable to join us tonight due to illness, but we're fortunate to have Isabella Martinez here to provide some beautiful music while you enjoy your coffee and dessert." Isabella felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Some of the guests looked curious, others seemed skeptical, and a few appeared downright annoyed. The woman at table 12 was whispering something to her husband that didn't look very positive. Patricia stepped back and gestured toward the piano bench. "It's all yours," she said quietly, giving Isabella an encouraging smile that didn't entirely hide her own nervousness. Isabella walked to the piano and adjusted the bench to the right height. Her hands were shaking more than ever now, and she hoped no one could see it from their tables. She placed her fingers on the keys and felt the familiar smoothness of the ivory. For just a moment it was like coming home after a long journey. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to her grandmother's living room, where she had first learned to love music. She could almost smell her grandmother's lavender perfume and hear her gentle voice saying, "Don't think about the people watching, mija. Think about the music you want to share. Let it speak for itself." Isabella took a deep breath and began to play the opening notes of Clair de Lune. The first few notes were tentative, almost whispered, but they rang out clear and true in the sudden silence of the ballroom. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the waitstaff who had been clearing tables froze in place, listening to the gentle melody that began to fill the room like morning sunlight. As Isabella continued playing, Her confidence grew with each measure. Her fingers remembered the piece better than she had dared to hope. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath 2 years of neglect but not forgotten. The notes flowed from her hands like water, each one connecting to the next in perfect harmony. The ballroom had transformed. What had been a noisy, restless gathering of overdressed socialites was now a captivated audience. The lighting seemed softer somehow, the atmosphere more intimate. Several guests had stopped eating entirely and were simply listening, their faces showing genuine appreciation for the music. Isabella opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. Instead of the skeptical expressions she had expected, she saw people who were truly moved by what they were hearing. The woman at table 12 had stopped complaining and was leaning forward in her chair, her eyes closed and a peaceful expression on her face. As the piece reached its most beautiful section, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't just playing notes on a keyboard anymore. She was telling a story, painting a picture with sound, sharing something deep and meaningful with everyone in the room. This was why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. The final notes of Clair de Lune floated through the ballroom and gradually faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then slowly, applause began to build. It started with just one person clapping, then another, then more, until the entire room was filled with genuine, enthusiastic applause. Isabella looked toward Ms. Patricia, who was standing near the wall with the biggest smile Isabella had ever seen on her face. Even Robert, the manager, who had been so worried about letting her try, was clapping and nodding with approval. But the real test came when the applause died down. Would the guests go back to their restless conversations and early departures? Or had the music accomplished what Isabella had hoped it would? The answer came quickly. Instead of returning to their previous behavior, the guests seemed more relaxed and engaged than they had been all evening. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter and more respectful. People seemed to be enjoying their coffee and dessert, more, lingering over their tables instead of rushing to leave. Ms. Patricia approached the piano with genuine excitement in her eyes. "Isabella, that was absolutely beautiful," she said in a voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Would you be willing to play a few more pieces? I think everyone would love to hear more." Isabella looked out at the audience again. She could see that people were hoping for more music. Even the skeptical-looking business owners at table 8 were nodding encouragingly. "I'd be happy to," she said, feeling more confident than she had in years. "What else do you know?" Patricia asked. Isabella's mind raced through her repertoire. She wanted to choose pieces that would keep the audience engaged while creating the right mood for when Dr. Williams gave his speech about the hospital. "I could play some Chopin next. Maybe the Minute Waltz to keep the energy up a bit." "Perfect," Patricia said. "And after that?" "I know some contemporary pieces too, some songs that people might recognize but arranged in a classical style." Isabella was surprising herself with how natural this felt. It was like riding a bicycle after years of not cycling. Once she started, everything came back to her. As Isabella began the lively opening of Chopin's Minute Waltz, she noticed something wonderful happening in the ballroom. The music wasn't just background noise anymore. It was bringing people together, creating a shared experience that made everyone feel part of something special. She saw an elderly man at table 5 tapping his fingers along with the rhythm. A young couple at table 9 was holding hands and smiling at each other, as if the music had reminded them why they fell in love. Even the stressed-looking hospital board members seemed more relaxed and optimistic. This was exactly what the evening had been missing. Not just sound to fill the silence, but music that touched people's hearts and reminded them why they were here. Isabella realized that she wasn't just playing piano anymore. She was helping to save the fundraiser, one note at a time. As she moved through the piece with growing confidence, Isabella felt her grandmother's presence strongly beside her. She could almost hear that beloved voice saying, "I'm so proud of you, Mija. You found your courage when it mattered most." The transformation in the room was undeniable. What had started as a potentially failed fundraiser was becoming exactly the kind of memorable, moving evening that would inspire people to open their hearts and wallets for the children's hospital. And Isabella was just getting started. As Isabella's fingers danced through the final measures of the Chopin waltz, something magical continued to happen in the Grand Wellington's ballroom. The music had woven itself into the very fabric of the evening, transforming not just the atmosphere, but the people themselves. What had started as polite attention had grown into genuine captivation. When the last notes faded, the applause was even stronger than before. Isabella looked out at faces that had completely changed from when she first sat down at the piano. The skeptical expressions had melted away, replaced by warmth and appreciation. People weren't just clapping out of politeness anymore. They were clapping because they had been genuinely moved. "That was incredible," said a voice from table 7. Isabella turned to see a distinguished woman with silver hair and kind eyes. "I haven't heard Chopin played with that much feeling in years." Ms. Patricia appeared at Isabella's side, practically glowing with relief and excitement. "The energy in the room is completely different now," she whispered. "Dr. Williams is ready to give his speech, but I think people would love to hear you play while he talks. Would that be okay?" Isabella nodded, feeling more confident with each passing moment. What would work best for a speech about the hospital? "Something gentle and hopeful," Patricia suggested. "Something that will help people connect emotionally with what Dr. Williams is saying." Isabella knew exactly what to play. "I can do a medley of some softer pieces, maybe start with Ave Maria, and then transition into the prayer. People recognize those songs and they're perfect for talking about helping children." Dr. Williams approached the microphone, and Isabella could see why Carlos spoke so fondly of him. He was a tall, gentle-looking man in his 50s, with the kind of face that made you trust him immediately. His eyes held the wisdom of someone who had spent years caring for sick children, but also the hope of someone who believed in making the world better. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Williams began, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet ballroom. "Thank you for joining us tonight to support St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Before I tell you about the amazing work we do and the dreams we have for our expansion, I want to say how grateful we are to have such beautiful music accompanying our evening. Isabella, your playing has been absolutely wonderful." Isabella felt her cheeks warm as gentle applause rippled through the room. She had gone from being invisible to being acknowledged in front of hundreds of people, and it felt both terrifying and amazing. As Dr. Williams began his speech about the hospital, Isabella started playing a soft, tender arrangement of Ave Maria. The music provided a perfect backdrop for his words about healing, hope, and the resilience of children facing serious illnesses. "Every day at St. Mary's," Dr. Williams said, "we see miracles. Not the kind you read about in fairy tales, but the real miracles that happen when skilled doctors, dedicated nurses, and cutting-edge medical equipment come together to give children a fighting chance." Isabella let the music swell slightly during the emotional parts of his speech, then pull back to barely audible during the more informational sections. She had never played for a speaker before, but somehow it felt natural. The music and the words seemed to dance together, each making the other more powerful. "I want to tell you about some of the children who have touched our hearts," Dr. Williams continued. "There's Carlos, a 16-year-old boy with a rare blood condition who dreams of becoming a teacher. Despite months of treatment, he always has a smile for the nurses and words of encouragement for younger patients." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Dr. Williams was talking about her brother. She glanced up from the piano keys to see the doctor looking directly at her with a warm smile. He knew. Somehow he had figured out who she was. "Carlos's sister works 3 jobs to help her family pay for his care," Dr. Williams went on. "She's an example of the love and sacrifice we see every day from the families who walk through our doors. And tonight, she's sharing another gift with all of us, the gift of her incredible musical talent." The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath as people realized that the young woman playing piano was directly connected to the hospital they were raising money for. Isabella saw several guests dabbing at their eyes with napkins. The woman at table 12, who had been so critical earlier, was crying openly. Isabella transitioned smoothly into the prayer, letting the hopeful melody carry Dr. Williams' words. about the new children's wing they wanted to build. As she played, she thought about all the kids she had seen during her visits to Carlos. The babies in the NICU fighting for every breath, the toddlers with cancer who still played with toys between treatments, the teenagers like Carlos who worried more about their families than themselves. The expansion we're planning will double our capacity, Dr. Williams explained. It will include a new playroom where children can be children even while they're receiving treatment. It will have family apartments so parents don't have to choose between being with their sick child and keeping their jobs. It will have the most advanced equipment available to give every child the best possible chance at a healthy future. The music seemed to be speaking directly to people's hearts. Isabella could see the change in the room's energy. Earlier, guests had been polite, but distant. Now they were leaning forward, hanging on every word, completely engaged with the mission of the hospital. As Dr. Williams talked about specific needs, new MRI machines, updated surgical suites, expanded research facilities, Isabella played, with increasing emotion. She thought about Carlos lying in his bed, dreaming of a future where he could help other kids the way Dr. Williams helped him. She thought about her parents, working extra shifts and taking out loans just to keep their family together. She thought about all the families who needed this hospital to succeed. Music has always been an important part of healing, Dr. Williams said, gesturing toward Isabella. Studies show that music therapy can reduce pain, lower anxiety, and speed recovery times. Isabella's beautiful playing tonight reminds us that healing involves not just medical treatment, but also feeding the soul. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes, but she kept playing. The melody of the prayer soared through the ballroom, carrying with it all of her hopes and fears and love for her family. Every note was infused with her gratitude for the doctors and nurses who cared for Carlos, and her desperate wish that other families wouldn't have to struggle the way hers had. The guests were completely silent now, except for the occasional sniffle or whispered, "Amazing." Even the hotel staff had gathered along the walls to listen. James and Kelly, who had covered her tables, were standing near the kitchen entrance with tears in their eyes. As Dr. Williams reached the climax of his speech, Isabella built the music to match his passion. "Tonight, you have the power to change lives," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "Every dollar you donate goes directly to caring for children and giving them hope for tomorrow. You can be part of their miracle story." Isabella brought the music to a gentle conclusion just as Dr. Williams finished speaking. The silence that followed was profound and meaningful. Then, slowly, the applause began. But this wasn't ordinary applause. This was the sound of people who had been deeply moved, who understood that they had witnessed something special. People weren't just clapping for Dr. Williams or for Isabella. They were clapping for Carlos and all the children like him. They were clapping for the power of music to transform an evening and touch hearts. They were clapping for the realization that sometimes the most beautiful gifts come from the most unexpected places. As the applause continued, Isabella saw something she had never expected to see. The wealthy, sophisticated guests were reaching for their checkbooks and donation cards with genuine enthusiasm. The energy in the room had shifted from polite obligation to passionate commitment. The fundraiser wasn't just saved, it was becoming something truly extraordinary, and Isabella had played a part in making it happen. The applause seemed to go on forever. Isabella sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. When she had nervously approached Miss Patricia just hours ago, she never could have imagined that the evening would end like this. The ballroom was electric with emotion, and she could see people wiping tears from their eyes while simultaneously reaching for their donation envelopes. Dr. Williams walked over to the piano with a smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "Isabella," he said, his voice filled with warmth and admiration, "that was absolutely extraordinary. I've been giving speeches at fundraisers for 15 years, and I've never seen music and message come together so perfectly." Isabella felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "Thank you, Dr. Williams. Carlos talks about you all the time. He says you're the kindest doctor at the hospital." "Carlos is a special young man," Dr. Williams replied. "And now I can see that talent runs in the Martinez family. What you did tonight, Isabella, you didn't just play music. You helped people connect with our mission in a way I've never seen before. As if to prove his point, a steady stream of guests began approaching the donation table that had been set up near the entrance. But these weren't the reluctant, obligatory donations that usually trickled in at charity events. People were writing checks with enthusiasm, some even asking for extra donation forms so they could contribute more. The woman from table 12, who had been so critical of the evening earlier, walked up to Isabella with tears still visible in her eyes. "My dear," she said, taking Isabella's hands in her own perfectly manicured ones. "I owe you an apology. I was disappointed when there was no professional musician tonight, but what you gave us was so much more meaningful than any hired entertainment. Could have been. You played from your heart, and it showed." She pressed a business card into Isabella's palm. "I'm Margaret Thornton, and I sit on the board of the City Symphony Orchestra. We're always looking for talented young musicians. I'd love to talk with you about opportunities." Isabella stared at the elegant business card in disbelief. The City Symphony Orchestra was the kind of organization she had only dreamed about when she was taking lessons as a child. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I can't believe this is real." But Mrs. Thornton wasn't the only person who wanted to talk with Isabella. As word spread through the ballroom that the piano player was the sister of one of the hospital's patients, more and more guests approached her. Some wanted to share their own stories about family members who had been helped by St. Mary's. Others wanted to know about her musical background and training. A distinguished gentleman in his 60s made his way through the small crowd gathering around the piano. Isabella recognized him as someone who had been sitting at the head table with the hospital's board of directors. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the sort of gentle authority that suggested he was used to making important decisions. "Miss Martinez," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Harrison Wells. I founded the Wells Music Academy here in the city, and I also run a scholarship foundation for promising young musicians." Isabella shook his hand, still feeling like she was in some sort of dream. "It's nice to meet you, Dr. Wells." "The pleasure is entirely mine," he said. "I've been searching for exactly the kind of talent you demonstrated tonight. Raw ability combined with genuine emotional depth and the courage to take risks. Those are rare qualities in a musician of any age." Dr. Wells paused, looking directly into Isabella's eyes. "I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our academy. It would cover tuition, private lessons, performance opportunities, and even a living stipend so you wouldn't need to work multiple jobs while you study." Isabella felt the world tilt slightly around her. A full scholarship? To a prestigious music academy? It seemed too good to be true. Dr. Wells, I don't know what to say. Are you sure? I mean, I haven't played regularly in almost 2 years, and I'm just You're a talented young woman who deserves every opportunity to develop her gifts," Dr. Wells said firmly. "What I heard tonight wasn't rusty or amateur. It was the sound of someone who has music in her soul. With proper training and regular practice, I believe you could have a genuine career as a performing musician." Ms. Patricia appeared at Isabella's side, practically glowing with excitement. "Isabella, you won't believe what's happening at the donation table. We've already raised more money tonight than we did at last year's entire gala. People are writing checks for amounts we've never seen before." It was true. The line of people waiting to make donations stretched across the ballroom. Isabella could see guests having animated conversations about the hospital, sharing the card of information Dr. Williams had provided, and encouraging each other to give generously. The energy was completely different from the polite, dutiful atmosphere that had characterized similar events. Robert, the hotel manager who had been so skeptical about letting Isabella play, walked over with a huge grin on his face. "I owe you an apology," he said to Isabella. "And more than that, I want to offer you a position as our special events pianist. We host fundraisers and galas every month, and after seeing what you accomplished tonight, I can't imagine having these events without you." Isabella's head was spinning with all the opportunities being presented to her. A few hours ago, she had been worried about losing her waitressing job if she made a mistake. Now she was being offered scholarships, career opportunities, and the chance to make a real difference through her music. But the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Williams pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Isabella, I want you to know that because of tonight's success, we'll be able to start construction on the new children's wing 6 months earlier than planned. And there's something else. The Wells Foundation has agreed to establish a music therapy program as part of the expansion. You helped make that possible." Isabella felt tears welling up in her eyes again. "Does that mean Carlos and the other kids will have music as part of their treatment?" "It means much more than that, Doctor," Williams said with a smile. "It means that children who are facing the scariest moments of their lives will have something beautiful to hold on to. Just like you gave all of us something beautiful to hold on to tonight." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many stopped by the piano to thank Isabella personally. She received dozens of business cards, invitations to perform at other events, and heartfelt messages about how her music had moved them. But perhaps the most touching moment came from an unexpected source. James and Kelly, her fellow hotel employees, approached her with shy smiles and a small bouquet of flowers they had somehow managed to find. "We always knew there was something special about you," Kelly said. "The way you talk about music, the way your face lights up when you hear a beautiful song on the radio. We just never imagined you were this talented." James nodded enthusiastically. "You didn't just play music tonight, Isabella. You showed all of us that dreams don't die. They just wait for the right moment to come alive again." As Isabella finally sat alone at the piano for a few quiet minutes, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed in a single evening. When she woke up that morning, she was a struggling waitress working multiple jobs to help pay her brother's medical bills. Now she had scholarship offers, job opportunities, and the chance to pursue the musical career she had given up on years ago. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself. She had discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act in spite of fear when something important was at stake. She had found her voice again, not just musically, but as someone who could make a real difference in the world. Isabella played one final soft piece as the hotel staff cleaned up around her. It was a simple melody her grandmother had taught her when she was very young, a lullaby about dreams taking flight. As the last notes faded into the now quiet ballroom, Isabella smiled and whispered a thank you to her grandmother's memory. Tomorrow she would visit Carlos and tell him about the incredible night. She would share the news about the scholarship, the new opportunities, and the successful fundraiser that would help ensure he got the best possible care. But tonight, she simply sat at the piano and marveled at how a single moment of courage had changed everything. The waitress who had stepped up to the piano had found more than just her musical voice. She had found her future, her purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with the simple decision to try.